But I even said to the students, I mean, the subject is classroom management.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I said to the students, these are master's students, so adults who are going into teaching, and I said, look, what's going to happen is that over time and with experience, you probably won't have this now, but it's something to think about.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if you could think about this subject, classroom management, as without the management?
Yeah.
What if it was just classroom?
Yeah.
What if I just knew that I could walk into a classroom and I didn't have to manage it? I could just enjoy it.
Yeah.
Honestly, mate, I think so many people don't step out onto the fringe, onto the periphery, and just wonder, you know?
How many teachers are always thinking about management? Because that's
it's exhausting.
It is exhausting. All right, we should start this.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Richard, let's talk about something that is an ever-present issue in the minds of teachers, and that is control in one form or another. Some people are control freaks. Some teachers like to go into a room and think, right, I just have to be in control here. Whereas others, they just seem to be a little bit more casual. They seem to just be able to walk into a room and everything just seems to be okay. One teacher might think, I have to get my classroom management right. I've got to think about management. Whereas another teacher just goes, actually, everything's just fine.
And yet, let me just cut you there for a sec. Sometimes the highly controlling person has less control than the one who's relaxed. That's what I've noticed. Like real control.
Okay. So there's the apparent control.
Yeah.
So if an observer might say, okay, there's a teacher who's got apparent control, but perhaps they don't. So anyway, what we've painted a picture of here, I should say, is there are two seemingly different ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can unpack the controlling one first. What do you make of that?
So I'm really fascinated by this area, and I mentioned this in a couple of my courses, and it gets a really good response because I think my story is quite common. I know there's a psychology in a lot of people that says I have to be in control of the situation, right? It's a compulsive need to control, and if that person's a teacher, they're going to have the same thing. And most of those people, doesn't make them a bad person, it's just a psychological trait, right? It can be overcome, but it won't be overcome if they don't think about it. So it's like a compulsive need to control, which means that you're thinking you've got to be on top of every bit of misbehavior that's happening. You jump on them, and I think it's also driven by fear, because that sort of person is fearful that this lesson's going to go pear-shaped, and that would be the worst thing that could possibly happen in the world to a controlling person. So it's difficult to kind of pinpoint the definition, but it's definitely a psychological kind of having to have control over a situation, a need to control the situation rather than responding to the situation. Yeah.
So swinging over to the side where teachers just seem to be in this calm, serene environment, has that got something to do with the mindset of the teacher, or has it got something to do with the quality of their teaching, or is it the students? Is it a case where you can say, oh, yeah, but that's just a good class, right? That teacher can be like that because their students are great.
Yeah, look, it's a slippery thing to talk about. It's a really good thing to talk about because the class. See, I have teachers when I present this idea about, that the compulsive need to control and ideally moving to something like you just described there, something more chilled out, where the teacher's less reactionary and more responsive to the situation. So if someone deliberately falls off their chair and makes a big noise, right, my old self would yell at them and, right, that's it, stand outside, blah, 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 right? Because I've just gone straight into reaction, because that's like my fear of losing control is high, right? When I transition to the relaxed guy, I would go, well, it depends on who it is, and you've got to have a good rapport with the class, but I'd more likely go, gee, that was a good noise. Now, up the front here, please. We've got a nice desk for you, just nice and shiny, perfect, like, this is your spot, and we're going to have a little chat at the end of the lesson, but not a bad effort before. Or something that really kind of, changes their mindset. Or I might remove them, but I wouldn't be barking at them, because I'd be looking at, right, what's going on here? what's the kid on about? What's my ideal outcome? What's the best action I can take to get that outcome?
So do you think that the student who then comes up to that special desk that you've prepared for them might be wondering whether you're being cynical in that point, or in that moment, I should say?
No, and this is why it's tricky to kind of tell these sorts of stories, because I'd have a smile on my face, right? The cynicism in that case would come across as an energy. So I'm very aware that I'm making a consequence for this kid. I'm wanting to have a chat with him afterwards. I'm not trying to escalate. I'm definitely trying to de-escalate the situation. The guy is always a guy. The guy deliberately did it in this example, right? The guy deliberately did it to make a big noise and to get up my nose and whatever, And so if you can sort of be chilled out about it, then you can steer the best outcome. Have a chat and say, "Hey George, what was that all about? Come on, Okay, so we're pressing pause on the have a chat just for a second. You see, when we're discussing these big ideas and this idea of control and some teachers being compulsively controlling and others being more relaxed and more responsive rather than reactive, it's a really big topic to cover. It's a bit like a jigsaw, and there's a lot of different moving pieces, and it's very easy to kind of forget to link a couple of those pieces together. And when I was editing this video, I realized, we never really linked together this authentic control idea with these different types of teachers with different sort of ways of controlling. And so this is the reason for the insert. So when I talk about authentic control, look, a researcher may have come up with some term for this. I don't have the time to try and find out what that might be. I wanted to talk about this thing, and I've used the term authentic control to do that. So I'll just paint a picture. Let's say you're a teacher and you've created a learning environment where the students are engaged, they're interested, they want to learn, they want to be there, they want to be in the room, they enjoy learning with their mates, with their peers. It's quite collaborative. There's a buzz in the air, all right? So that's a high quality learning environment, and that the teacher in that situation who set that up, I would say, has authentic control. The students are behaving because they want to behave, because it's fun and exciting and interesting to be on this ride, on this learning ride that they're all on. That's different to students behaving simply because they don't want to get into trouble, right? So you can look at a lot of classes and they look like they're perfectly in control, but they're kind of compliant because it's too much of a bother mucking up, because they get punishments and they get into trouble, so they just behave because of the teacher. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about kids who do the right thing because they want to do the right thing. So that's what I'm calling authentic control. And I think you'd agree that that's the highest ideal. So the question is, if we paint our two fictitious teachers, one who is compulsively controlling, who tends to be reactive, who has to be on top of every little thing that's going on, versus the teacher who's not laissez-faire, they can be highly structured, but they do it in a relaxed way with an authentic personality that they teach through. They roll with the punches. Nothing seems to faze them. Right? So there's those two teachers. Which one do you think is better suited at setting up a high quality learning environment that has authentic control? To me, it's a no-brainer. It's obviously the more relaxed, roll with the punches, responsive type teacher than the super compulsively controlling teacher. Now, this is a generalization, but in my experience, that's the way it works. The highly controlling teacher can often have kids like very ordered classrooms, and they look, the traditional teachers think, oh, that's fantastic. But is it really? Because again, are those kids behaving simply because they don't want to get into trouble, or because they really want to learn and it's a wave to ride? So that was the link. That was the link that I was hoping to make that we didn't get around to making in the Have a Chat. So that, this idea of authentic control, and that if you can transition to a teacher who is more relaxed but is able to get really good control that's authentic, then I think that's the ideal. Hopefully that clears that up. End of insert. Back to the Have a Chat.
I think what we're also, I think what we're also, what we need to realize here is that we've jumped into this scenario a long way down the track.
Yeah. We need to backtrack a little bit in the conversation.
Yeah, so it's probably not fair to immediately jump in and say, well, that teacher's a control freak and this teacher over here is relaxo. I would suggest that the teacher who is relaxo has spent a long time investing in responding appropriately to student behaviours in such a way that they feel very comfortable just being able to see things going on without having to react to them, which would then avoid the barking reaction, the cynical reaction, the explosive reaction.
Well,
is that the kind of thing that you're suggesting?
Yeah. See, if I may tell a quick story, I don't know if I've told this one before with you, but
everybody loves a story, Richard.
This was fairly late in my career, and I was still in reaction mode, but I was becoming very aware that I was like Jekyll and Hyde, because outside the classroom I was very fun-loving and whatever, but in this particular school I hadn't kind of nailed the kids, I hadn't had the kids where I didn't have them where I wanted them, so there was a level of frustration there, and I was left my classroom and I was walking through a D&T lesson actually, which was sort of like exposed so I could walk past, and I saw this teacher deal with a student who I taught in that calm way. It was like, hey, you're off task, move over here please, da-da-da-da. And that was the right thing for me to see at that time. It was a revelation. I'm going, man, my God, if that was me, I would have jumped on it, because that's what gets up my nose. And I spoke to this person afterwards, and someone said to me once, every time a student misbehaves, what they're really asking for is, please sir, will you kind of help me in a life correction? I need a bit of life correction here. And I'm going, oh my God, that is so what I need, and I'm so far away from that, right?
Yeah.
But it's what I need at the time. And then the cogs start turning, and then within 6 months I'd actually made that shift. But this was after a lot of teaching, so it does take a while to make that transition. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I think it does, because what you're suggesting then is that before thinking about management, or before thinking about control, and before I go into this classroom, what tools do I have in the box to manage what I'm about to see? I think what you're suggesting here is that there needs to be a strong element of self-reflection before you even start to think about using those tools. As in, here's a toolbox in front of me, but what kind of a person am I first?
Yeah.
Because the revelation that you've just shown me is that you seem to have just been going on and on for a while, with respect, of course, thinking that you were doing the right thing, but then suddenly you get this insight from somebody else, and you go, "Wow, that's powerful."
Well, no,
so you had that moment of self-reflection.
My moment of self-reflection, that was 20 years after self-reflecting. Like I knew that I wasn't happy with certain classes, and in this particular situation in this school, I was fairly new to the school, even though I was late in my career. And it's like, okay, I need to steer this. I need to get these kids engaged, right? I need to get them on my team, because at the moment I'm just beating heads, and that's not a happy place. So frustration and self-reflection should be linked. But I was always reflecting, but I hadn't. That was the key. That was the missing key for me at that time. But that's a really important point. I just think humans by nature don't tend to reflect much. No, I'm serious. Like,
no, I don't. No, I'm not. Sorry.
It's like I've always been a self-reflector, and so it amazes me that people don't seem to reflect. And teachers are so damn busy. But in the courses that I run, I force this level of self-reflection, and I force people to respond. I've worked out, this is in an online capacity, I've worked out how to do it, and that's really important, because there's no point me suggesting various strategies of whatever it is that I'm suggesting if people haven't thought about it beforehand. And through that thinking process, the skepticism comes out as well, if there's any there. Oh yeah, well, this all sounds good in theory, Richard, but I can't see how it's going to work in practice. Fantastic, awesome, that's really common. Thanks for that, stay tuned. I've never seen anyone who hasn't turned around from that point. You need to have people reflecting on their practice and on what they're about to learn, and to be open to the possibility that their practice is actually making it harder for them in the classroom than another possibility.
I like the fact that you've talked about the notion that teachers are always very busy. but you also talk about the fact that they need to reflect. I wonder, here's a question for you, I wonder if teachers reflected more, would they find themselves being less busy?
Look, we all talk about, the aim of professional development, or the aim of teaching, or the aim of the schools in this day of, standardized testing is to have the best outcomes for kids, the best results, blah, blah, blah. Well, how about this for an idea? Let's run PD, where the number one aim is to make the teacher's life easier, more fun, more passionate in the classroom. Because I guarantee if we can find ways, and there are ways where teachers
Sign me up.
Where teachers can have more fun in the classroom, and I'm not talking about cracking jokes and sitting down and handing out chocolate. I'm talking about fun that comes from genuine learning and kids being on the page, and that inspired spark that happens. If we can get teachers doing
more
that,
professional fulfillment.
Professional fulfillment would be a much more succinct way of saying it.
It's interesting, isn't it interesting? Because we always talk about improving student learning outcomes.
But if you improve professional fulfillment, that will be a natural follow-on.
That's what I was just going to say. We talk about improving student learning outcomes, which is great. I mean, I'm all up for that. At the expense of, there has to be a cost, right? It's like there's got to be a certain fuel that drives that or powers that, and obviously that's going to be the teacher. But what if the teacher runs out of fuel? So if we think about professional fulfillment, shouldn't those two complement one another?
Exactly. And that relaxed person you described, he's less likely to say, "Oh man, I'm stressed. It's just so overwhelming," than the control freak, who's like reacting to things and having a need to be in control. I think you find that person's a lot busier. So to find there are more efficient ways of working with students, and so I think the two things are linked. I think
Well, let's think about the controllers amongst us. Bless them.
I'm a recovering control addict. I've done my 12-step program. I am a controlling person. I will always be a controlling person. I am in recovery.
I think one of the essential steps, maybe this is steps 1, 2, or 3, you can fill me in here, is to have a good laugh about the notion of control, because maybe that's a good circuit breaker.
You got to laugh at yourself.
A pressure relief valve. So let's think about the controllers amongst us. How do they change? Let's say that they would prefer a slightly less controlling environment. How do they go about it? Self-reflection is the first thing that we've talked about. But
this conversation, having people like that reflect on this stuff, is the first step. You can't make a change if you don't have an awareness of where you're at and that there's another possibility. Some people who are highly controlling, they don't want to change. That's kind of their security blanket. They might even acknowledge that. Well, you can't change, and no one's going to change unless they see the need. But that before they see the need, they have to acknowledge where they're at. So having these sorts of discussions, or at least even with yourself, is really important. So that is step number 1. There's no step-by-step process, but at the end of the day, that guy or that girl or that woman you're talking about who's relaxed in the classroom, and we know those sorts of teachers, and I was always envious of them, and then I became much closer to one. They have found they've thought, here's an idea. My name's Richard. I've got a personality. Why don't I be the person inside the classroom instead of this other boring reactive dude who the kids don't like? There's a good idea. So it's about finding your authentic self and finding an aspect of your personality. I mean, some people have personalities blossom over time, usually after age, early 20s, sometimes later, sometimes earlier. But you've got to find a way to express your teacher self through your own personality, because then that's authentic. And being a bit, it could be being daggy. You've got to find your own way, but it's that authenticity. Because if you're the control freak and you're barking orders and snapping at kids and all that sort of stuff, that's your perceived teacher persona that you think is what you need. But it ain't helping, I don't think.
Thinking about our pre-service teachers now, the ones who are about to embark on the magnificent profession that is teaching, we're not suggesting that they should be friends
with
the kids. We're not suggesting they should open themselves right. I mean, there are boundaries, right?
How many hours do you want this to go on for? Because that's a whole nother topic.
Let's just mention it. Just put a pin in that. We'll mention it. We'll talk about it a little bit, but yes, we'll spend the rest of the day talking about that.
Can I say one thing though? Because this happens to all new teachers. Well, particularly if they're young. If you've got mature age teachers, it's probably a different story. But if you're a new teacher who's young, like early 20s, this will happen. You'll be in a situation and some kid has just said something to you or responded to you in a way or made some comment or has acted in a way that you know, hang on, buddy, you're thinking that I'm your friend, right? It will happen. And how do you deal with that? You can't say, hey, Mary, you're trying to be my friend, or I mean, definitely not if it's the opposite sex, but even if it's the same sex, David, you're trying to be my friend. Now, it's a weird thing. You can't even say that. And I worked out a way to handle it. And it's like, let's say it's you. Let's say you're the student. Hey, Colin, I don't know if you've noticed, but you're the kid, you're the student, and I play a different role here. I'm actually paid to be the teacher, and there's a line on the ground between us. You just stepped over it. Mm. And when you say that, I'm talking to high school kids here. They all get it. There's a line between us. You just stepped over it.
Well, you've made it very visible, haven't you? You've taken. I mean, you haven't actually physically drawn a line, but everyone can imagine a line on the ground.
Yeah,
right?
But you need to establish. Hey, look, we have two different roles here. You're the student. I'm the teacher. There's a line between us. You just stepped over. Stay on your side. Okay. And they get it. It's a non-offensive way and a powerful way to deal with that situation.
Something else I've heard you talk quite a lot about, and I think this relates, is that the relaxed teacher, or the teacher who has invested years of this kind of approach, usually is also the one who is more happy for students to take a greater amount of control in their learning.
Yeah.
And I guess the buzz term for that is student-centered learning. I mean, we need to use a buzz term, right? It's an educational podcast.
I don't think it is a buzz term. I just think you have to define that. There's teacher-centric learning and student-centric learning, and they are two. And there's everything, and then there's a range in between. But they are kind of opposites of one particular continuum.
In your experience, now we're not going to quote any scientific research data here, but in your experience, is there a correlation between teacher-centered and more controlling?
Absolutely, because you can't be that controlling person in a student-centered environment. It's sort of like, I don't know, putting a square block of ice into a round container that holds water or something. It just doesn't work. And maybe that's the reason why a lot of teachers are reluctant to move across into a more student-centered approach, is because they haven't realised that they are that controlling person, and they do want everything really ordered, and they want to have their finger on every pulse. The reason that student-centered, that highly structured, because you can still have a lot of structure in a student-centered approach. There needs to be structure. There needs to be a scaffold. But the reason we do that is because it's the most effective way for kids to take responsibility over their learning. And that, I think, is the number one aim in education, or should be. Whereas if I'm calling all the shots, if I'm telling you what to write, when to put down your pen, when to listen to me, blah, 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 you haven't got any agency over that at all. No. It's by default. And so, and I think I don't see those two things linked much. I don't hear people talking about student-centered learning from the point of view of, we do it because we need kids to have agency over their learning. Anyway,
so self-reflection before we even start to think about management. I really like that, and I think there's a lot more to talk about, and I'm sure we will. But I think we'll start with that. Richard, thank you so much.
Cheers, it's been a pleasure.